Good Tuesday, everyone. Welcome to the Volquest.com podcast. Glad to have you along with us on this Tuesday. Brent Hubbs of Volquest.com. You see him there on the screen. We got Grant Ramey. We got Matt Ray. We got Rob Lewis. Lots to get into in this edition of the podcast. Be sure and hit that like button on YouTube. Get this thing up to 500 likes. Also, be sure and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you're not a subscriber to Volquest.com, you're missing out on tons of recruiting coverage, basketball coverage, football coverage, a great discussion about everything going on in the world of Tennessee athletics and college athletics in general. All right, guys, let's get this started. We're going to start with a little basketball talk out of the gate. We'll try to get that one out of the way, Grant, and cleanse everybody's mouth of that, whatever that was on Saturday with Tennessee and Kentucky. We talked about it a bit on the rewind on Sunday night with Rob. What was your take on what was an unexpected loss? Look, you're not going to go unbeaten in SEC play, but nobody, I don't think, saw that one coming, Grant.
No, I mean, Rob wrote it in the weekly 3-2 he posted today. Massive missed opportunity. Chris Lofton getting his jersey retired, sold-out crowd. You beat Kentucky how many times at home under Rick? 5 times in 7 or 8 tries at this point. And a Kentucky team that came in limping. I mean, you beat South Carolina by 43 in Columbia a week before. South Carolina went to Kentucky, beat Kentucky. Looked like a Kentucky team that, I mean, I'd never seen that little amount of blue in Thompson Bowling Arena. That's always a game where Kentucky fans travel. It's always a situation where they're going to make their presence known, and they weren't there, and Tennessee didn't show up either. And you can't get whipped on the glass like they did, 43-23. Can't go 3 for 21 from the three-point line. You can't miss point-blank missed layups like they did. It looked like they were tight, looked like they were rushed, looked like they just got outplayed, out-hustled, out-manned, whatever it was. I mean, Kentucky's got a lot of talent. It hasn't made sense all year that it hasn't clicked. And on Saturday, they found a way to make it click.
Yeah, and Rob, it just, I mean, the physicality part for Tennessee, we talked about it on the rewind, getting shoved around on the glass, and getting out-rebounded by 20 is just that's the biggest head scratcher. But then you throw in a 9 of 31 when you talk about Santi and Tyreek Key and Zakai Ziegler. I mean, that's a head scratcher too. I know they're not going to shoot it great every night, but 9 of 31 plus out rebounded by 20 is a bad recipe for basketball.
Yeah, and 3 of 21 from 3-point range. It's just, I mean, there are all kinds of numbers that sum up, how bad Tennessee got whipped. 13 offensive rebounds to 4 is a big one. So many things that Tennessee did. Kentucky turned it over eight more times than Tennessee. Tennessee held Kentucky to 35% shooting. I mean, all those numbers, point to Tennessee winning the game. It's a broken record, but when you get just absolutely manhandled like they did on the glass, it almost doesn't matter what else you do when you create that many extra possessions for the opposition. And it's basketball is a long season. Some of these crazy things happen, but that was a very big missed opportunity, and there's no way to sugarcoat it.
All right, so that one is a missed opportunity. You got to flush, Grant, and move forward. What is it about this team that you like about them moving forward? How many more red flags do you have about this team because of Saturday, or is it just hey, that's a basketball deal? They are who they are. That there's enough evidence out there for them to be who they are, and that's a top 5, top 7 team nationally, and everything's okay.
The thing that the biggest red flag is Saturday felt like last March all over again. That game plan that Kentucky had going in looks exactly like that Michigan game plan that we saw in Indianapolis, where they're going to guard the three-point line heavily. They're going to let Uroš spin on the block a million times if he wants to spin on the block and score 20 points if he wants to. I mean, Calipari said after the game they didn't feel like Tennessee could beat them making twos. Tennessee could beat them making threes, and they guard the three-point line to not let that happen. That's the biggest red flag, because you got to find a way when people are focused on the perimeter to still hit your shots and still get guys open and to make it. I mean, you can't go 3 for 21. That's a recipe for disaster. What I like about this team moving forward is they usually respond pretty well from being humbled, and they're going out of town for a couple of games. They're going to Mississippi State, a team they beat down pretty badly a couple of weeks ago at Thompson Bowling Arena. It's a team that's lost 5 out of 6 since they started 11-0. Seems like they're struggling pretty heavily. It's a building where Tennessee's had success in recent years under Rick Barnes. So it's good for them to get out of town probably and to be humbled a little bit and to get on a plane and fly out somewhere and try to win a basketball game. And then you go to LSU Saturday, same situation where LSU's struggling. They haven't played good basketball. I think they've lost 4 in a row at this point. it's another winnable road game. So to get out of town twice this week, you got to go pick up a couple big wins, kind of reset and pump the brakes a little bit.
All right, Matt, jump on in here too. You know plenty about basketball. I know you don't cover them on a daily basis, but you know plenty about the game of hoops, as all of us do. All of you jump in here and answer this question, because this is my question about this team. When, Grant, building off what you're talking about, the Michigan plan, taking away the three-point line, you're 3 of 21, and you're not shooting it well. How does Tennessee combat offensively on nights where they don't shoot it well from the perimeter? What is the answer when the three-point shot's not falling for Tennessee? Matt, let's any of you guys just jump on in here.
Yeah, I think for me, Rob talked about several different stats reflecting the night. Kentucky went 22 of 25 from the free throw line. Tennessee shot 10 free throws. You got to find a way when that perimeter shot's not falling. You have to find a way to attack the hoop. If they're defending the three-point line that hard, get somebody in the air, go around, at least make an attempt, to get to the rim and try to get an easy look from the free throw line. Because, and I think anybody will tell you this, it's play basketball, especially a shooter. The best thing you can do is see the ball go through the hoop, and what better way to do that uncontested than at the free throw line.
Does this roster have a guy who can do that, Rob, Grant?
I mean, Julian Phillips has got to have more than 2 shots in a game. I mean, he's too talented. We saw it against USC. I know he dealt with foul trouble and his minutes were a little bit limited. That's another thing. These guys can't get in early foul trouble. I mean, people can complain about the officiating all they want, but Santi's picked up a couple early fouls a few times this year. Julian's done it. He's a freshman. Maybe you expect that. But at some point, they got to stop fouling early. Julian's got to get more shots. He's that guy that can get to the free throw line more than anybody on the team, and that's a good point Matt made. You can't have those numbers be that lopsided, especially when you're the home team in that situation. But I do think Tennessee, even if they take away the perimeter, an opponent does, they can beat you with twos because Urosh can score it, but you can't have Olivier Kamwa 2 points and whatever number of rebounds he had. I mean, he was a no-show against Kentucky after playing some of the best basketball in his career the last few games. So they can beat you with twos if Olivier shows up, if Urosh shows up, if Julian's getting his shots and get to the foul line. I think that's the corrections they have to make. They can't, and the missed layups too. They could have beat Kentucky on Saturday if they just make their layups.
Rob, the Olivier thing's a head scratcher to me. He was playing so well, and I know the rebounding was a question, but he played so well at South Carolina, and then it's like the faucet turned off. What do you make of that one?
I don't know the answer, but that's troubling for me if I'm Rick Barnes and I have a senior like that who's played that much basketball. There's no shows against Kentucky in a game where with Shibwe that you're going to have all hands on deck inside, and Olivia Grant mentioned he had some foul trouble, but that doesn't explain just. I mean, Rick was disgusted about a lot of things, and he didn't like throw Olivier under the bus the way he can do some kids, but he was pretty clearly disgusted in the post game with Olivier more than any other player on the team. I mean, that's the only guy that he really came close to. Going all in on, and there's a lot of different reasons for what happened, but your senior power forward that's matched up with Oscar Tshiebwe, when he scores 2 points and grabs 2 rebounds, that's going to be tough to overcome. And I wrote this, and I'm not putting it all on Julian. I'm not saying Julian has to be the savior of this basketball team, but that he's got to play up to his ability, which is substantial. And taking two shots in a game like that where he is, if you're just talking about athleticism and ability, he's one of the most talented kids on that floor, and did not impose his will, was tentative, and he's the one guy they have that can really beat you off the dribble, get into the paint, do what Matt was talking about, get to the free throw line. I mean, Zakai can get in there, but at 5'7", finishing is not his strong suit. Whereas Julian's 6'8", he's long, he's athletic, he can jump out of the gym. He's just got to be more assertive. He didn't have to score 25 like he did against USC, but if he scores 10 against Kentucky, that's a completely different basketball game.
And is it just wishful thinking on my part that Josiah is going to put it on the floor and shoot a 12-foot jump shot off the dribble?
Not going to happen.
That's just not going to be his game. Is that kind of where we are after 3.5 years?
I mean, he'll do that every once in a while. That was how he got one of his buckets the other day. He pulled up from the mid range, but just generally, I've stopped looking for it.
Okay. Well, I've always thought his game was there, but if it's not there, then to me, Grant, it puts it back on. To me, it puts a lot back on Olivier, because your other post player, you're going to play depending on matchup, right? If you're playing an athletic big man, you're going to play Adu, right? If you got to be a real physical enforcer, it's got to be Euros in there to hammer, because Awaka's probably not really ready for that defensively right now. So that does that not put it back on Olivier as being the one consistent post player for Tennessee?
Yeah, I mean, Olivier's got to be their most consistent. I think he's got to be their most productive. He's got to be the guy that they can lean on night in and night out. And 19 from Uros the other night was great, and I thought a lot of those were tough buckets against Oscar. I feel like a lot of people attack Oscar, and they think he's a defensive liability. I think that's how Alabama beat Kentucky by 26 in Tuscaloosa the week before, because they just kept attacking Oscar off of ball screens. But you just can't have guys that just don't show up. And it's Olivier. You just can't have 2 points, 2 rebounds, and a no-show. You got to have more consistent production. You got to be able to rely on him because, like Rob said, he's your senior. He's your power forward. He's the guy that's played some of the best basketball of his career. You go back to South Carolina and Mississippi State before that in Knoxville a couple of weeks ago. He's got to be the guy that, yeah, I mean, they put in Jonas for a little bit against Kentucky, and Oscar drove right by him and scored. And it was just too easy, and they got to have more. And he's not the guy that's going to give you, like, he scored 15 against – I can't remember, South Carolina or Mississippi State won, and that's great, but that's not going to happen. You're not going to rely on that night in, night out. What you are going to rely on is you need to be getting, 10 and 6 from Olivier or 9 and 7 or something in that range where you know what you're getting from your senior power forward.
How does this team handle pressure this week? Because you gave away an opportunity at home. You got to hold serve at home in the league. Now you got to get it back on the road. Do you think this team feels any pressure this week going on the road?
I think they're pretty good about that kind of stuff. Don't you, Grant? I mean, bouncing back and kind of tuning out noise. I mean, I could be proven wrong, but I'll be surprised if they don't come back and play well this week. I mean,
I agree. I think these are the moments where they play well. They got humbled. They got embarrassed by a Kentucky team at home. They saw their win streak at home over. Now they get to go on the road. They get to take advantage of a pretty soft SEC schedule to start with. Mississippi State and LSU are not very good basketball teams. They're not playing good basketball right now. My biggest thing is, like, when Texas comes to Knoxville on January 28th, that's going to be a top 10 matchup. Does Tennessee look tight and look rushed and look, I don't know, like they're not the better team when they are the home team? They're going to have probably a sellout crowd. It's going to be a big game atmosphere. What do they look like in that kind of game? How do they – because what we've seen from them when they fail in March is it looks like they're tight. They're not making shots. It looks like they're just not ready for that moment. Now, when they get that next chance at that big moment, what do they look at? Or what do they look like? Because I don't really think that moment is at Mississippi State or at LSU. You can make big answers this week and you can respond in a big way, but I would be sitting tight waiting for Texas to come here and see how they look in that kind of game.
Yeah, I mean, they got off to an 8-0 start, you know what I mean? And it's – but so you thought this thing's going to go the way it expected to go. But then when it got into that seesaw deal back and forth, that they couldn't get the stops that they needed. They couldn't make the plays that they needed. What was that tightness, Rob? What was that? The moment kind of hit some of these guys, or do you think it was just a night where they just didn't make a bunch of shots?
I think it was just a night where they didn't make a bunch of shots, because you look at the guys who were talking. I mean, Julian struggled, and he's a freshman, but I mean, guys who have played in huge games and lots of them: Josiah, Santiago, Zakai, just Olivier. I mean, your 3 senior guys who are your core scorers. I mean, just didn't have it, and so I don't think it was a matter of the moment. I mean, maybe with Chris there, they wanted to try and make everything perfect. I don't know if that was. I don't really think this team thinks like that. But I guess you could maybe consider it, because Lofton is around quite a bit. I mean, guys know him. I know Josiah really respects him a lot. He spent time with Santi, that kind of thing. But I would not put a lot of stock in that. They were too big for the moment, because all of us have been in there in that arena during these kids' careers when it has just been off the chain. Big game, whether it's Arizona, Kentucky, Arkansas, Florida. So I don't think I think that team is. I don't think they get affected like that.
Yep, a team didn't play well.
I think, and I'll give Calipari credit.
Do what?
I'll give Calipari credit, because I don't think he's the greatest coach in the world, but that Kentucky team was a wounded animal who just gotten punched in the mouth at home by the worst team in the league. They didn't, and one thing we've not even mentioned, they didn't have their starting point guard. Severe Wheeler didn't play, leading assist guy in the SEC, and Calipari got his kids to play with a desperate intensity that Tennessee just never matched all day.
It dawned on me today the crazy world we live in where Kentucky beats Tennessee and Kentucky douses their head coach in water in the post-game locker room. Like, I think as embarrassed and as badly as Tennessee played and got outmanned and hustled and out everything, that's a nice compliment that Kentucky beats Tennessee and they're celebrating with a ice bath in the locker room.
That is a heck of a statement, isn't it, Matt? When all the years of Tennessee and Kentucky, that's where this thing situated itself Saturday afternoon.
Well, I mean, I think what both those guys just said right there, Grant and Rob, you see the world that we live in now with them dousing Calipari. But like Rob said, when's the last time that it felt like Kentucky had to come out and play with, desperate intensity to win a ball game against Tennessee? Now, obviously, there's been some big time matchups, but this felt like make or break for Kentucky's season. And, they came out and did what they needed to do. So, yeah, like Rob said, credit to Calipari on that. But it's definitely different than what we've seen in years past.
Yeah, that was a circle the wagons game for the Wildcats. And I mean, the noise was from their own people. It wasn't the national people talking about them. It was their own people that were getting on them, and they circled the wagons well.
I looked up a stat last night. Tennessee's beat Kentucky 5 times in Knoxville in the Barnes era. 3 of those Kentucky teams were ranked number 4. One of them was ranked number 12, I think, 17 and 20. The last 2 Kentucky teams that won in Knoxville were combined 18 and 29 overall because they won during the COVID season when Kentucky won like 8 games that year. And then they come in here Saturday 10 and 6 and won in whatever 3 in the SEC and found a way to win it. So I think Tennessee likes them better when they're a little bit more confident and high on themselves than versus punching off the ropes.
Well, and Tennessee seems to, Rob, play better in those moments, right? I mean, that's kind of been their mainstay. I mean, the bigger if it's a name opponent, the bigger the better, the more talented team, the better they seem to play, whether it's at home or on the road. I mean, you look at Kansas, you look at Arizona, even though they lost that game, it's a hell of a basketball game in Arizona this year. You look at what they did to them last year, it almost feels like they relish that moment more than the moment where they're supposed to be the blue blood, so to speak.
Yeah, I don't disagree. The number Grant just rattled off about beating Kentucky and Knoxville, I think that's a great one. And, add this team to the list. And, the Colorado game earlier this year. I mean, you can throw that in there. I mean, when this team has a challenge in front of them, when, they're the hunted or people say, you can't do this or you're a big underdog. I mean, they generally respond pretty well. And I'm not saying they're terrible when everything's going great, but they have shown a tendency to slip up in these situations.
Well, and the thing too, I mean, how many ranked teams lost in college basketball?
I think 12, depending on which poll you're looking at.
It is and fans have a hard time grasping that, Matt. I mean, they really do. And I think part of that is just the football mentality that everybody has, because if you lose one, it's over. And I'm not pushing aside losing this game, but because this is a bad loss for Tennessee. You should have taken care of business at home, but it's not the end of the world because it's basketball. And I think fans have to be reminded of that. And Saturday was a great reminder, not just for Tennessee, but for a bunch of ranked teams around the country.
Yeah, it's not South Carolina and Tennessee this past football season. All of your goals still intact. You still have a chance, like Grant said, to go back out, answer some questions in SEC play this week, and then, build right back toward another big contest against Texas. It is a different mindset. It's a different way to think. And, obviously, you don't, if you're a fan, you don't want to see your team lose anytime they go out, but it is a different mindset, a different way of thinking that, sometimes hard to settle on, especially when it's ugly, as that game was.
And you're a double-digit favorite at home against your rival.
Yeah.
That was just different.
College basketball, a year ago, kind of in a nutshell, Tennessee went to Rupp and got run out of the gym, 107 to whatever it was, 79. I think Kentucky shot like 70% from the field. It's like they never missed. And from there, Tennessee won 19 of their next 20 SEC games. They won the SEC tournament. So this team can respond and probably will respond. It's just about positioning yourself in March to be in the best possible situation in the NCAA tournament, get some good matchups. If you're playing well then, and you're playing loose and you're playing confident and you're doing what you can do, just win games then and get there and see what happens.
Is this league Alabama, then a rung down to Tennessee, and then the rest? Is that kind of where do you put the league right now?
I mean, before Saturday, I would have said it was Alabama and the rest. And now, I think that with what you saw, how you saw Tennessee slip up, I think that's fair to say that it's Alabama and the rest. And Tennessee hasn't played anybody yet. I mean, they've not played an SEC team with a winning record. Am I wrong there?
No.
I mean, and they won't after this week. They only played 70 games and still want to play a team with a winning record in the league. So I think the jury is very much, out on Tennessee until they start cycling through, Alabama, Auburn, and is Texas A&M for real? I don't know.
Yeah. I agree with what Brent says. Probably Alabama and then Tennessee and then probably everybody else. Arkansas is talented, but they've dealt with injuries. They're struggling right now. Kentucky's, who knows where they go from here, how they respond to that win at Tennessee. Texas A&M, Missouri, I can't figure out. They go back and forth. It feels like Florida's starting over, LSU's starting over. And Tennessee gets Alabama in Knoxville. They don't have to go to Tuscaloosa this year. That's going to be later on in the season. So it just depends on if Alabama slips up, if Tennessee slips up from here, if Brandon Miller keeps being the best, one of the best college basketball players in the country, let alone the best freshman.
Yep, and you got a team like Georgia that's not a laydown because they're playing better than everybody expected them to play. Not great, not a great team, but they're to this point overachieving. So we'll see what they do. And then we know that Auburn has always, Bruce Pearl's teams have always been a tough matchup for Tennessee for whatever reason defensively. That he's had a lot of success going against Rick Barnes' defenses all the way back to his time at Tennessee when Rick Barnes was at Texas. So plenty of basketball left. It starts for Tennessee on Tuesday night, later tonight in Starkville, Mississippi, as they take on Mississippi State for the second time in a couple of weeks. State plays better at home, but I think there was a little bit of a preseason fool's gold on how good State was, given what they played in the non-conference to kind of bolster some defensive rankings. They've struggled in conference play. We'll see if Tennessee can put that together, get it back together, get to where they need to be on the glass tonight in Starkville against the Bulldogs. While basketball is going on, football is also cranked up. We got a couple things going on. The transfer portal ends on Thursday. We'll see if anybody else goes in for Tennessee. We'll see if Tennessee picks up anybody else. Now you can pick up somebody from the transfer portal later than Thursday, but Tennessee goes to the classroom on the 23rd, which is next Monday. So we'll see if anybody lands there. Big picture question here on the transfer portal to all you guys. This is a 45-day window. Is that too big of a window for the portal? Do you think when you look at the calendar and you look at things for coaches, do you think this needs to be tightened down? Does the window need to open up later in December? Do you want to close it down before bowl games? How do you think the portal calendar, seeing this 45-day window now, how should it be addressed, Matt?
I still think, like we talked about the other night, the month of December is tough. And, whenever you open it, it's going to be tough. And whenever you close it, it's going to be tough. But I do think it can be shorter. 45 days is a long time. There's a lot of, obviously, ongoing situations there. But as we see, Taven Jackson jumps in late and quickly, finds a home at Indiana. So I don't know, what the NCAA will choose to do with it. But I do think it could be shorter. I do think it could be 30 days. But I think you're going to get a lot of complaints if you try to close it down before bowl games. Who's going to get a chance to see, to step up, if somebody opts out, like Squirrel White, steps in, pretty effortlessly, pretty seamlessly for Jalen Hyatt and has a big day against Clemson. And obviously Squirrel got to play, a lot this past season. But for example, if somebody else, didn't have that opportunity, didn't get that opportunity, and had to try to make a decision before the bowl game, what happens and what kind of impact does it have on rosters, during the bowl game? What if somebody, bolts that it would have been key, during that bowl game? So I don't know. I think it's tough to say, but I do think it could be shorter than 45 days. Because you look at the spring window and, I think you're going to see guys, especially at some of these schools that played the later bowl games in the month of December and January. I think these coaches, are able to carry on conversations and convince some guys to stay through spring. And that window is shorter when it opens back up in the spring. So, I don't, 15, 45, 30, I don't know where you go with it, but I think it can be shorter than 45.
30 was the number that came to my head as Matt was talking. I think 15 would be pretty intense and pretty short. Now, I don't know how to fix it on the calendar because, like you guys have talked about on recent pods, like with the signing day stuff, like December is already crazy as it is, but now we're moving forward to more playoff games, more rounds of playoffs, where that's going to completely change and intensify December even more because there's going to be more teams in playoff situations and hosting playoff games, for that matter, on their campuses. So I don't know where to put it or how to change it on the calendar to make it easier, or maybe you just – I know staffs are already huge, but maybe you just grow the personnel side of the staff and get guys more into player personnel and roster management and dealing with all this stuff. But at the same time, you're talking about visits and you're talking about just recruiting these guys all over again like you did out of high school. So 30 days is, I think would be – I don't think it's that big of a difference than 45. I think it maybe speeds things up a little bit, but I don't know where to move it on the calendar to make it any easier on anybody involved at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, Grant. I think 30 sounds right. And, I mean, I would like, for the coach's sake, for it to be over. Like, if Tennessee had, maybe one active week after their bowl game, and they could have shut it – the staff could have shut it down and stepped back for, 2 weeks until this junior day. I don't know what the answer is, but 45 seems long. And Hubbard or Matt, ask you guys this question because I know it's something basketball has run into. They're running out of official visits because the basketball official visits are in a 2-year window. And they reset this year, but the limit was set 2 years ago. It's 27 that you can use spread out over a 2-year thing. And at that point in January 2020, the transfer portal really wasn't a factor.
Right.
And now, think about how many transfers you've used official visits on in that 2-year period. So it's people I've talked to are pretty hopeful that that number is going to get expanded to take into account. But is it football dealing with that right now? What's the number, 56?
Yeah, most football guys most football programs aren't using 56 visits, but, out of a class of 25. I mean, most of them, because these kids make 7 unofficial visits anymore, you look at the official visits that Tennessee used this year, gosh, I would bet 80% of them were victory laps. Right? I mean, Tennessee had an official visitor in last weekend, and Devin Hobbs, who's basically staying in town and going to school. He's already signed, and so that was just kind of a what's that visit for? The same for Spillman that way. So I don't think they're running into that. Here's one of the questions I wonder about the transfer portal. Does the NCAA, should they look at limiting them to maybe 3 official visits instead of 5?
I think that's
does a kid need to take 4 official visits in 7 days? I mean, we're seeing this, Matt, where a kid's on campus 18 hours for an official visit because he's trying to go 3 places in 4 days. Mm-hmm. How many of those guys really need 5 official visits? Let's be honest here. I'm not calling any of it tampering, but everybody knows everybody in the world of social media, right? So there's already dialogue taking place. If you don't think Taven Jackson knew he was going to Indiana before he went in the portal, then I got some oceanfront property for you. I'll sell out here in Corrigan. So that's just the world we're in. I don't know that you need 5 new official visits for transfers, Matt.
No, I don't think so either. And like you said, it's the turnaround, 18, 24 hours on campus, getting there, getting back to the airport, trying to get to the next school. That's a lot in and of itself. But, take into account that, and there's different kids every year, like Jared Verse, the Rhode Island tackle this past year, those guys that blew up that didn't really have an initial recruitment around. Like, yeah, I guess it impacts some of those guys a little bit, but most of these kids have seen, a majority of these schools. They've either been through there, like you said, on, an unofficial visit at some point, or they've been, with their 7-on-7 team there to some form of a camp. So they have an idea of what's going on and where they want to look. So 5's a lot, especially, like you said, to try to fit into such a short window. I think 3 for transfers is plenty.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. I know that's going to be part of those things. These things are going to be the topic of conversation because the month of December is going to be such a topic of conversation in recruiting. Tennessee had a bunch of guys on campus for unofficial visits for Junior Day this past weekend. Matt, you broke that down really well in the Rocky Top Rewind. If anybody hasn't watched that, I would encourage you to check that out. We've had stuff on individual guys all year long. Again, big picture here. feels a little bit like Josh Heupel and Rick Barnes, a little bit of similarities in their first couple of years, where Rick Barnes wasn't – everybody was talking about where are the big names coming from when he was recruiting, right? It was Admiral Schofield. It was Grant Williams. Where are these big names coming from? Then once they had success, then suddenly these five-star big-name guys that the Blue Bloods were also recruiting started showing up on Tennessee's radar. It's not exactly the same, Matt, but it feels a little bit similar with Tennessee football right now based on the fact they had success this past year. You're selling something different in year 3, much the way Rick Barnes was selling something different in year 3 and year 4 in his program.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, like we talked about last night on the Rocky Top, or Sunday night on the Rocky Top Rewind, the one of the focal points of the junior day and talking to guys, the 5-star guys, Ryan Wingo, Mike Matthews, Williams Wannery, the Tennessee started to pique their interest in September. They're winning ball games, they're selling out stadiums, and then that continued. And now you've got that product to point back to, and Tennessee can sit down and have those conversations with these kids and show them, hey, this is what we did with player X, and this is what we think we can do with you. And these kids take into account all those things. They look at the rankings of the players. They look at Jalen Hyatt's rankings, where he was, those types of things, and try to compare that out and say, if this staff was able to do this for this guy, what could they do for me? And I think right now that's where you're at, for Josh Heupel going into year 3, is you're able to get these kids up there, sit down and sell your product instead of your vision now.
Rob, it feels similar, right? How many basketball players have you talked to after the first couple of years under Rick Barnes where they talked about player development and how big that was a factor for them when they considered Tennessee, with their lofty rankings, and they had other blue bloods looking after them.
Every kid that I've talked to that comes on campus is, and I'm sure Grant probably is the same way. I mean, even today, they're still showing the before and after pictures of Admiral as a freshman and Admiral as a senior, and he's not the only one. But yeah, I mean, the kids are aware of it. I mean, you get a kid like Keon Johnson. If they can take Admiral Schofield and do that with him, what can they do with me? Or Jonas Adu, same kind of thing. What can they do with with a 7'1" guy with my skills when they can turn Grant Williams into an NBA player that's getting ready to cash in on his second contract? So that is a very big thing. And it's when you get your identity on tape like that in either sport, and you can point to kids that looked like this as a freshman and look like this as a junior, I mean, I think that resonates with football and basketball players for sure.
I think one difference is year 1, year 2 of basketball under Rick was a struggle. Like it was pretty slow at times. And then you look at what Heupel did in year 1, it wasn't a crazy season, but it was a lot of pleasant surprises. It felt like they were moving in the right direction a lot faster than people thought. And then to go from that in year 1 to year 2, being everything they did, 8-0, number 1 for a week in the first college football playoff rankings, all that stuff. And not only that, you're selling that 11 wins, you're also selling Nico, and a 5-star quarterback, a guy that you lost a Heisman candidate in Hendon Hooker, but here you go, you're going to hand off the reins here in the not so long future to a guy like Nico, and to win that recruitment the way they won that recruitment, and to be able to point to him, not only 11 wins, but we got this guy here who's going to ready to step in and be that man moving forward, just to pick up where Hendon left off and to continue to have that kind of success. Now, not to overlook Joe Milton, all that stuff, whatever is going to go happen in 2023, but it feels like, if anything, there are similarities, but it feels like football is almost accelerated version of what basketball did early on under Rick.
Well, and to kind of further on what you were saying there, Grant, yeah, I agree. You're selling Nico, and that was the guy that early on with those 23 recruits helped make Tennessee the cool school again. But I think another thing that you can point to if you're Josh Heupel and the Tennessee staff is, we're not, we had the nation's #1 offense. We produced a Biletnikoff winner, but we're more than just an offense. We're trying to build a football program here. And you look back to the 2023 signees, Arion Carter, David Hobbs, Caleb Herring, Shandavian Bradley, all of the defensive backs were really great evals, and it continued to climb in the rankings over time. I just think that you're selling a whole product, now. I think when Josh Heupel was hired, a lot of people were like, oh, what is this? Is this just going to be Tennessee trying to score points and be competitive? But now you're saying, no, it's not that. It's a complete product. We're trying to build a full football program. And I think the kids can see that when you look back to the junior day, and the guys that you had on campus, 2 top 150 edge rushers, the number 1 defensive lineman in the class, and in Wannery, and then, on the opposite side of the ball, those, offensive high profile type recruits in Wingo and Matthews, who are both, arguably the top receiver in the class. So I think for me, that's the big thing for Tennessee right now, is they're selling the whole product.
Well, and it's easier to sell when you have tangible proof of what you are and what you're about. And that's something that it did take Rick Barnes 3 years to get to that. But when they got to it, it made their sales easier. And it's obviously, an easier sell for Tennessee heading into year 3 as well. Josh Heupel has an assistant coach to hire. Someday he'll hire one. It just doesn't seem to be in a big hurry. Now, I think there's movement there. I think we're going to see something. I'm not sure if it's going to get hired before the transfer portal window closes or Tennessee goes to class, but it's getting closer there. We'll see what happens. Jeff Ferris from UCLA, his name has been out there. I think it continues to be out there. Austin mentioned that in the roundtable or in the rewind, and obviously had it on the message board. Then if he promotes within, it's Alec Ablin as well. We'll see. I don't know that Seth Literal from North Texas is really – I don't know how intrigued he would be to join the staff. I think he's got some other potential opportunities out there, so we'll see what happens with that. But that gets done, then Tennessee gets ready for another junior day coming up on the 28th of January, so plenty of coverage of that. We've got more coverage of Nico out at the Polynesian Bowl as he's out there this week. We'll have full coverage of that. And then later today, you'll want to be locked in here at Volquest at On3. Final On3 rankings come out for the class of 2023. We'll see where guys move, who's moving, who's shaking for Tennessee. I would expect there'll be some movement. We'll see what that looks like. That's all coming out later today as well. And, of course, we got plenty of basketball coverage to get you ready for Tennessee and Mississippi State. So a ton of things out there to talk about, ton of things going on in the world of college athletics at the University of Tennessee. Be sure and check it out at Volquest.com. Be sure and jump on and subscribe. You promise you won't be disappointed with that. Also join us on our YouTube channel. Hit that like button on your way out the door after watching this podcast as well. That's going to do it for the Tuesday edition. Don't forget the Mailbag podcast coming up on Thursday. We'll put the link on the board for you to get your questions in there. That's coming up Thursday with this crew right here. We'll answer your questions, dive into more recruiting, hoops, and football, and whatever else is on your mind. That'll be in the Thursday edition. But that's going to do it for this Tuesday edition of the podcast. For Rob Lewis, Matt Ray, and Grant Ramey, I'm Brent Hubbs. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, everybody.